Hello everyone, welcome back to our English videos. This week we're not dealing with news, international news. Today we're going to have a little fun. Well, fun for me. Maybe you don't think that English poetry is a lot of fun. I'm making this video in support of one of the fun packs for the Self-Learning Center. So there's a pack that you can do. It's called the Folk of the Air. Within this pack, there are a series of activities that you can complete, and you can earn a series of self-learning points. Within this pack, there is a poem called The Stolen Child. It's a very, very famous poem in English literature, particularly of the 20th century. This poem was written in the late 19th century by William Butler Yeats, or sometimes we say W.B. Yeats. In Chinese we call him Yeats, very, very often mentioned British poet. The first thing that I would like to talk about with you is that when we're studying English, very often we think that poetry is not very useful. It's very easy to think this way. I'm not saying that you will use poetry in your daily life, but what I am saying is it's immensely beautiful. And there is a long history, there is a long tradition of English poetry. You can learn a lot about culture and history if you study poetry of any culture, of any country. Particularly today, in this poem, we will learn a little bit about English Romanticism and how Romanticism and the modern world come together. So the poem is called The Stolen Child. What I would like to do now is I will read for you the poem. Okay? It's absolutely beautiful. You can listen to other people read it, but I will read it for you. Let's read it together. Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuthwood in the lake, there lies a leafy island where flapping herons wake the drowsy water rats. There we've hid our fairy vats full of berries and of reddest stolen cherries. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wave of moonlight glosses the dim grey sands with light, far off by furthest rosses we footed all the night, weaving olden dances, mingling hands and mingling glances, till the moon has taken flight. To and fro we leap and chase the frothy bubbles, where the world is full of troubles and is anxious in its sleep. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wandering water gushes from the hills above Glencar, in pools among the rushes that scarce could bathe a star, we seek for slumbering trout, and whispering in their ears give them unquiet dreams, leaning softly out from ferns that drop their tears over the young streams. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Away with us he's going, the solemn-eyed, he'll hear no more the lowing of the cows on the warm hillside, or the kettle on the hob sing peace into his breast, or see the brown mice bob round and round the oatmeal chest. For he comes, the human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, from a world more full of weeping than he can understand. Thank you very much. So that is the very famous The Stolen Child. Now, I'm not sure if you have heard of this before, but I will tell you anyway, that there is this old story in Irish mythology where these fairies, they come and they steal away young children. And they steal them so that they can be, companions. They don't steal old men like me. they steal young kids. And in this particular poem, there are a few things that I'd like to let you know. There's a lot of analysis that we can perform, but I just want to say a few things. Okay? Number one, this kind of a poem in English literature is called a ballad. It's called a ballad. It's a little bit like 木兰诗 in Chinese literature that we study. It is a poem that tells a story. Particularly, it's a story that comes from folklore. It's a folk legend. This kind of a poem is called a ballad. The second thing that I'd like to mention is that this poem is considered a work of romanticism. It's a work of romantic literature. And so there are a lot of things, particularly childhood, nature, the supernatural, nostalgia, escape from the modern world. These are important things to remember when it comes to romanticism. The last thing that I'd like you to remember is that W.B. Yeats, as an important English poet, was actually an Irish poet as well. When we think of English literature, very often we think of Great Britain. So poets like Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe. But actually, Irish literature is also very important in the English world. If you are interested in Irish literature, I really recommend reading W.B. Yeats. There are a few other things in the text. One particular segment that gets repeated, the voice of the fairy or fairies. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild with a fairy hand in hand. And this famous line that I like very much. For the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. At a time where great wars are happening, this time in history, it's important to remember that the world is a complicated and difficult place. And so there is something very natural about wanting to escape, to become a child and escape into nature or the supernatural. This is a theme that I think was very pertinent at the time and is still very important today. So I hope that you have fun listening, reading this poem, reading this poem. I hope that you will give the Fun Pack a try. It's a very interesting topic, the supernatural. There are particularly fairies is a very interesting topic. So I have two questions to ask you with regard to this poem. Number one, what do you think of when you think of childhood and nostalgia? Number two, when you were a child, did your parents or your grandparents or your elders ever tell you some stories about fairies or the supernatural to excite you or scare you? I know that my parents did. I hope that you like these questions. Leave your response in the comment box below. So thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.